and welcome to the Gotham Outsiders, another very, very special episode. Carrying on, I'm your host, Bad Obsessive Chris, and the wayward son of our show, my co-host TJ.
Hello, everyone. I'm your Chris proclaimed Batman acolyte and wayward son. It's almost like I love Rainbow Rowell, Chris.
Or Supernatural, which leads us in to
or that too.
Oh yeah, that too. Which leads us into the guest we have today. With us today, writer of Batman Urban Legends, Future State, Robin Eternal, Detective Comics, and so many more, Meghan Fitzmartin.
Hello. Carry on, my wayward son.
That was all for you.
I'm honored. I'm touched. I love it deeply.
Oh, well, Meghan, thank you so much for coming. This is a huge deal for our podcast. We're big fans.
Absolutely.
I'm honored to be here.
Well, to start off, we have a warm-up question for you, which we ask quite a few guests at this point. Who, in your opinion, is the best Bat detective in the Bat family, and why?
Tim, obviously.
Yes.
I had a feeling you'd go there.
I feel like it's necessary. I feel like it's almost contractually obligated for me to say that, but I think so. I think here's the reason. I think it's because Bruce. It wasn't like Bruce was figuring out who was going to be Batman when he was Tim's age. So
Yes.
It's yes. Batman is the world's greatest detective now. At this point in his life, Tim hasn't grown up yet, so give him time.
I love that.
We will accept that answer.
And self-proclaimed world's greatest detective. Just saying.
Yeah, exactly. Did you go to detective camp? Have there been detective trials? I don't think so.
Did you take a survey of all detectives and come to this conclusion?
Yeah, exactly. I want to know how scientific this is.
Please, yes. So, what's your relationship with Batman, the franchise and the character, and how did you first get into the concept as a fan?
That is a good question. So, my relationship, I think, with Batman is, I didn't read the comics at first because my dad's a Marvel fan. So when I got into comics at first, my dad knew more about the Marvel side of things. So that was the first comics that I got into. But I knew about Batman because of Batman the Animated Series. We didn't have television until I was much older. And so I would go to my grandparents' house and I would see Batman on the television every once in a while. But by the time we finally got a television was when Justice League, the animated show, was on. And so that I feel like is my full intro. And then I went back and watched Batman the Animated Series, and I watched Batman Beyond. And when I got my fill of Bruce Timm's Batman at the time in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, I then went and got the comics and deep dived in. I am staring at my Batman comics right now, and man, it is about the height of at least halfway to my wall. And I read the novelization of No Man's Land, and I read that was one of the first ones, as well as the Bruce Wayne Murderer series is really up there for me.
We're big Bat family people here, so
Absolutely.
Good pick.
Thank you.
And how did you get into writing for DC Comics? What was that journey like?
Right, so I started on Supernatural which is a Warner Brothers show, as you mentioned earlier. I started as an assistant and then worked my way up to becoming a staff writer on the show in its last season. And while I was there, so DC is part of the Warner Brothers family, and a guy, Jeremy Adams, who wrote the Scooby-Doo episode of Supernatural. He's written a bunch of he's currently the writer on Flash. He was at the time writing DC Superhero Girls and was and I was an assistant still, and he was like, "Hey, you seem cool. Do you want," and I know that you write, and he read some of my stuff and was like, "Do you want to write some DC Superhero Girls?" And I was like, "Yes, obviously, 1,000%. What are you talking about?" I think I salivated. We were at a premiere party for the show, and I think I was salivating on the ground, and I had to focus because I was in charge of running the premiere party. And so I was like, I can't think about that right now, but we'll talk about this later. But yes, please. And so then I wrote a couple episodes for DC Superhero Girls, and that was super fun. Jeremy and I became really good friends, and then whenever they were looking to have some writers for Justice Society World War II, which is a movie that Jeremy and I co-wrote, they asked me. And then around that time, DC, this was when Dan Didio was still there, they were looking for new writers. And so they reached out to Warner Brothers Animation, because Warner's Animation had been doing DC stuff, of course. And they were like, send over some writers. And I was one of the ones that they sent over.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is so cool. I love DC Superhero Girls. So good.
Thank you very much. It was very fun to do. I wrote an episode called Kidnapped, which all of my friends made fun of me for, because kidnapping is one of my favorite tropes of all time. I love kidnapping. I'm obsessed with it. I read a lot of Nancy Drew as a kid. She gets kidnapped in chapter 18 of every book, and it's almost always by chloroform.
Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah. Listen, I was a young study of the art of the mystery and of kidnapping.
I love that.
And so, but that was so we were joking about, like, you know, Babs is babysitting. Well, who is she babysitting? And I was like, Damien, because I love Damien. So I got to add Damien to the.
Oh, yay.
It was very exciting.
We love Damien here too.
Love Damien so much. I was very wary at first, because I remember I was reading the comics at the time that Grant Morrison introduced him, and I was like, I don't know about this. There's already a lot of family. What do we need another kid for? And then during the Batman and Robin with Dick Grayson and Damien, I was like, never mind, I love him. He's my demon child. And
our murder baby.
Our murder baby. I love so many murder babies.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Great fiction trope.
It truly is. So not many people have written for DC Comics and Supernatural. How did your previous writing credits inform the work you're doing now and what you hope to do in the future?
I think as a writer, you sort of just absorb everything that you are ingesting and thinking about. They are all pieces of me. I grew up watching Supernatural before I started writing on the show. I grew up reading DC Comics before writing DC Comics. Like, the DNA for both of those stories was already sort of present and there, which is really helpful, because then it meant that, like, I didn't have to play catch up. There's a bunch of history for both of them that can be extremely daunting. And so because I've sort of already existed in the history of both of those spaces, I've been able to deep dive and say, oh, okay, well, I don't have to, like, do a lot of that work about figuring it out. But what I get to do instead is, like, think about the emotional journeys and the emotional arcs, which is what I really enjoy about those stories in the first place.
So how did your stories like Urban Legends and Robin Eternal, Detective Comics come about? Like, did you pitch those story ideas to DC or vice versa? And were any of those experiences different from the others?
Yeah, I mean, so my experience with DC is a lot of it, especially because I'm, like, a newer writer to DC, will get what are called backups, which is what my story in Detective Comics was. Robin Eternal was a little bit different, if only because this was, like, a new thing, and they were sort of trying out writers and things like that. And so that was sort of like, I was talking to my editor, Paul, who I love, and Paul was like, all right, so, like, this is sort of what we're thinking about. And I got to, like, sort of have, we've sort of ballied about our different ideas of, like, what that story could be, because this was in the time before the pandemic, so we got to be in the same room to talk things through, and then the rest of the stuff sort of happened during the pandemic. So a lot of the conversations that I've had with my editors have been over Zoom or phone calls or text messages in some cases. Like, I got a text message for one thing from an editor who was like, do you like this thing? I was like, sure. I do. What are you talking about? And then I got a phone call later. But it's pandemic, man, sort of adjusts the way that I did business, at least. So yeah, so a lot of times it'll just be like we have a need for like this particular space or this particular story. We need to like explain. So Detective Comics is a really good example of like we need to sort of explain where Penguin is at, what like this is sort of what we're looking for. So I turned in a plot for what that could be, and then we talked a little bit more about it, and I adjusted and so sort of the same with some of our parts was I was thinking about it and I said, well, it could be this, like this is what for some of our parts though I had to like early on in the process I was like, so hey, this is a story about identity and like this is really the only thing that like makes sense for this story, so I just need to make sure that we're okay with doing this like right off the bat. Otherwise I was like, I don't really know what other story we could do right now, so other than that, and they were cool with it. But yeah, so it's both the same and different for every type of concept.
Yeah.
I loved your Penguin story, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I'm really proud of it.
Fun.
It's so hard to do 10 pages. I think like 10 pages is maybe especially like one complete story. It is very difficult. It's just so hard. Like you have maximum 6 panels on a page. And so the economy of space is very high, which is why they have a lot of younger writers who haven't, like younger in the sense of like I hadn't done comics before in this with them. That's why they have a lot of us do backups is because like it feels like I learned how to drive on my mom's SUV, and it feels like because I learned how to drive a big ass SUV as my first car, I can drive literally anything.
I love that.
Can I ask how involved Tynan was like in the process of your stories?
As far like I don't have a lot of access to Tynan. I've heard he's a very nice guy. But once again, like with the pandemic being the way that it is,
right?
Like there's not a lot of like unless it is phone calls, not a lot of meeting. He's a very, very busy person. So mostly it was just like, I think in my understanding, I would like turn in stuff and they would run it through Tynan to be like, this cool with what you're like thinking about. So same with Marissa, with like Detective Comics and things, being like, this cool, like this going in a general direction, and them being like pro it or against it or something like that.
So you focus mainly on the character of Tim Drake. What about him spoke to you and felt unexplored that was worth exploring now?
In part, I think that like Tim has a lot of fans at DC, and he's just not like, poor kid hasn't really had a lot to do. I think Tynan has been really good about using him, and but he's just not been around as much. And the more that I was looking in and reading, like the best part about this job is that like I have to read comics, like or reread as the case is for a lot of them. The struggles, it's great, it's the best thing. And so like the more that I was like honing in on Tim, the more I really spoke to me. Like I started texting a friend of mine just a bunch of different, like, he has to always be the like the kid that takes care of everybody, and he's the good kid, and like nobody gets a chance to mess up, like he doesn't get a chance, like all the other kids get a chance to be their own person and Tim doesn't. And so he like really attached to my heart in a way, because I used to be I went to school to be a youth pastor is my background, and I recognize those kids, and I always, like, whenever I was working with kids, I camp counselor or in youth groups and things like that, like I always recognize those kids, and they're the kids that everyone just assumes are fine, and there's something very deep beneath the surface, which as a youth leader, you're always like, okay, like how can I help? Like I want to lean in and I want to like work with you and whatever. As a storyteller, I'm like, great, we can plumb the depths, make it as sad as possible. It's great.
Yes, I was that kid, so I always relate to Tim on that regard.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the themes you explored in your story in Urban Legends, like the idea of who are you when you're not trying to be this person for this person, like that's something I could relate to so much, and I thought you portrayed it really beautifully.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. And now, did you have your urban legend story in mind while writing Robin Eternal? And so, like, has that future Tim already gone through this arc and figured himself out? And how are the struggles between those two versions of Tim, present and future, similar and different?
I think, I mean, in my head, future state Robin Eternal is a different um timeline almost of a Robin who is still sort of vying for like that thing that Tim breaks out of in urban legends. Like Robin Eternal is Tim, still trying to be all things for all people, and it ultimately is his downfall. Like it's ultimately the thing that turns him into the half monster that like falls into the water and dies. Like that is the future. Like ultimately that I wasn't thinking about urban legends during Robin Eternal, mostly because I didn't know if I was going to be able to get to write any more of Tim. And so I just put all of my general angst like that I feel the character would feel into him for that. And so now when I look at it and think about it, to me those struggles are still there in future state Robin Eternal, so it feels more like a deviated timeline.
And your urban legend story began in Pride Month. In fact, friend of the pod, Alex Jaffe, said it was ironic that the most talked about DC Pride story from that particular week wasn't from DC Pride #1, but from Urban Legends. Was that a coincidence or calculated to debut in June?
I mean, the thing about comics, the thing about anything in entertainment, my boss at Supernatural one time said something that I thought was extremely profound, which is everybody calls it show business, it's really more like community theater. Like we're all just like doing our best and trying our hardest, and like sometimes things are calculated and sometimes they're coincidences and sometimes they're mixed together at the same time. Like it's all like, I think at that point we were just trying to get the story out like when we could do it. Bellin has a very like stacked schedule, so we were trying to make sure that we got Bellin on. I was trying to make sure that like I would get the script in. It wasn't necessarily about like the DC Pride of it all, because like Tim wasn't going to come out until the 3rd issue anyway. So, but it was really funny. I do remember seeing all of that stuff going out and I was like, oh no.
It was just good timing.
It was just it all like the stars aligned in a really funny way.
So Tim is obviously still trying to figure himself out in urban legends. He hasn't committed to sexuality as a label, but is it fair for readers to refer to him as queer now? How did you approach this identity, sexuality, and beyond when creating these stories for him?
I think for him, I just like didn't want him to have a label. Like that wasn't the point of the story. Well, the point of the story wasn't to give him a label. The point of the story was for him to realize that like there is more for him to figure out. And so I've been really like, I don't really want to give him a label because it feels like that is something that is for him to discover. And I know that like that is so writer woo woo to be like, I want the character to decide. But it really is like, especially with these stories, I've been very intentional about leaning into the character, and like the things that I have noticed on the internet have resonated with people have come out of characters in moments where like I didn't like I leaned into the character more than I leaned into like my own instincts. And like one could say that they go hand in hand for sure, but those have always been the more successful moments. And so it's difficult for me to put words in Tim's mouth when I'm like, no, I'm waiting for him to say it. Like I have my own opinions, and I think everybody else does too, but like ultimately in the story of everybody else's own identity and sexuality, like it is up to them to say it. It's not up to me. It's really important that me, a third party person, does not put that label on him, but that he does it for himself.
We have a non-believer in our midst, Jadzia. We love her dearly, but she's like, she's waiting for Tim to be like, yes, I am something. She's waiting for that before committing to this idea or like believing it.
Sure.
Like, so do you think that's like a fair approach, or like, or at this point in what's been published, do you think it's like undisputable that Tim Drake is not straight?
I believe it is undisputable. But once again,
Right.
it's difficult for me to say that. Like, it's difficult for me to say for anybody. But yeah, for Tim, I believe that it is undisputable for him.
All right, that's all we needed. Jadzia, we're coming for you. Was Bernard a character you went back to for your urban legends plot, or was he one that you found for the plot? Being such a minor character, what about him seemed to be the right choice to build on this plot line?
Bernard is really interesting. I really enjoy war games. I know it's an iffy space for a lot of people, and it's totally fair. It was one of the first darker, I think, Bat comics that I read that I was like, oh, I get this. And I really loved the, like, because it felt, you know what it was, is it felt so much like No Man's Land to me.
Yeah.
And so that like really spoke to me, because I love like the full Gotham sort of event type things. And so I remember that, and when we were talking about the story, I remember like thinking about Bernard, and I remember honestly more so thinking about Tim and where Tim was at during the time of war games, and how like the moments and pieces of war games sort of spoke to where he was at, and just in terms of like unsure, like he was just sort of unsure about where he fit into every place. And so I really sort of wanted to get back to that particular emotional space for Tim. And so when I went back and I was reading through all of my Tim comics, Bernard really popped out as like oh, remember this time it really was important for it to be like, you know, not in a superhero space, but like in a very Tim personal space. Like, this is who Tim Drake is, and this is a person who knows Tim Drake. So like all of those pieces together were really important.
Do you think Tim is committed to the Robin name now?
I think so. I think that like his search for identity is he's always known sort of like the Robin of it all. He's never really known the Tim of it all. Like, he has sort of just leaped into the Robin. And I think that especially as he is like going through his own understanding of himself right now, I think he needs to like lean into what he does feel safe in, what he does know, which is Robin.
So my boy Connor Kent cameoed in your urban legend story, and he and Tim have a complicated history of being read as queer coded. Was any of this running through your mind while writing their interaction?
I mean, I've seen the internet. I'm aware that the internet exists.
All right.
You know, Connor is part of Tim's history, just like Stephanie is part of Tim's history, in varying different degrees and varying different ways. But we are who those around us. We are what others around us are make us to be, and so.
All right, that's a fair answer. I will take it.
Many fans are upset that Stephanie and Tim broke off panel, and him being queer is being seen as by some as invalidating their previous romance. Can you speak to these fans' mindsets and how it was decided to handle Steph and their relationship in Urban Legends and Robin Eternal?
So part of I love Stephanie. I have loved Stephanie.
Yeah.
For forever, and I will always love Stephanie. She is amazing and gets the short end of the stick almost all the time. And in part of her getting the short end of the stick, she is sometimes used as and was written thusly to be a female explainer for Robin, or for Tim Drake specifically. And I don't love that for her, because I want more for her than to just be like, yes, let me explain to you Tim Drake. Let me be a story function for Tim. And I didn't want their breakup to be part of that. Also, to be perfectly honest, it was 10 pages. It was very, very small amount of space. Right. So I think like those two things together, I was like, this is Tim's story. Like, and that this has to be about sort of Tim and working through that. Because I think too highly of Stephanie to like have her be the thing that props Tim up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Also, once again, 10 pages. 10
Yeah.
pages per story. I was like, we gotta get in, gotta get out.
Yes, Stephanie deserves better. She just deserves a
Just-
lot.
Just truly
The whole world.
my full queen. I absolutely adore her.
I cosplayed as her once. I love her so much.
No way.
Yeah.
She's the best. I've had many conversations with friends of mine where I'm like, but Stephanie Brown, I mean, like, this is one of the things, like, War Games is one of my favorites, but it's so heartbreaking. This is another thing about me. I just like when characters are so sad. And Stephanie Brown is sad all the time. I'm like, oh my girl, I love you.
She really is. It's true.
Because like stuff happens and it sucks.
Chris, didn't you meet Tynan in your spoiler costume?
I went to meet him in my costume.
Amazing.
I'm like, that awkward moment when Chris has met Tynan more times.
Amazing. That's wow.
I'm totally just teasing you.
I have met him 3 times, so
Have
Wow.
Wow.
That's very special. You've one-upped me numerous times.
Aw.
Aw. I'll introduce you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
So before the DC media coverage for Urban Legends #6, many fans were hesitant to believe that a Robin could be confirmed queer, and thus there was a lot of talk online about possible queer baiting. Was this something you were prepared to deal with, knowing that fans wouldn't have all the necessary information to pass judgment until part 3 of your story?
I mean, I think that's just the nature of storytelling in the first place. Like, this is something that I've experienced numerous times. And the thing is, a story is not complete. I mean,
Right.
it's easy to like have strong opinions in the middle of a story, because you're not done with the book yet, basically. So this is something that like I had to learn in a lot of different jobs that I've had. So I mean, but also I come from fan fiction, I come from fandom, I come from spaces that I mean, as do most people in media. Like every time anybody talks shit about fandom, I'm like, oh right, so like all of your faves who wrote Star Trek fan fiction before that like got them to write Star Trek, that they are what now? But it's men, so it's different. So
yes, say it.
So to me, that is what like a lot of those spaces are for. It's to work through your feelings on something. It is to work through the open-endedness and the questions that you have, and knowing that like the story keeps moving on and keeps moving forward.
And on the other hand, we had fans who aren't thrilled about Tim Drake being revealed as not straight. What would you say to those fans, if anything?
Once again, that's what fan fiction's for, my dude. Like, okay, cool. If you like, this is I think the thing at the end of the day for anything is that like if you I remember getting upset about story stuff when I was younger, and it spurred me on to want to make a difference and to want to tell my own stories. And I think that should be the motivating factor. You can yell at me on the internet all you want. My mute button is very strong, so you will be talking to the void.
Good
but
for
like, you can yell all you want, but like unless you want to make a difference, unless you want to do something, I don't know. You're just gonna be spinning wheels.
Yeah, that's fair. That's what fan fiction for could be like one of the taglines of the show. Just saying.
Honestly, why is it not a shirt? Because like that, I feel is my answer to so many arguments where I'm like, no, that's what fan fiction is for. No, it's like I hear you. I absolutely understand. That is what fan fiction is for.
Have
That'll
you tried fan fiction?
That'll be in our merch store coming soon.
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Can I get royalties on that? Like, what's
So what is, on a totally different note, what is your DC Comics hill you will die on? Something silly or specific you have intense opinions about? For example, a past guest had strong opinions on whether Batman does or does not do that. Cat emoji.
Sure.
Best
Best day on Twitter.
Best day on Twitter ever.
Best day on Twitter. what is my strong okay, here is a hill that I will die on. Batman is actually, I have a couple. Oh no, you've opened up a horrible can.
Go for it.
This is all we want.
Batman is not Batman if he does not have a Robin. Just as you see, is not a Batman story if Robin doesn't exist. Thereby, almost all of the Christopher Nolan Batmans are shit. I don't care.
Ooh.
Ooh.
That's a hot take.
Yeah, that is a hot take. I love it.
It is a hot take. It's my favorite thing as a woman in a geek space. I'm aware of what all of the I'm aware of what cis het nerd dude bros fave Fight Club movie is.
Yes.
I understand. Their opinions can be wrong, and that's okay.
That is okay.
And that's absolutely okay. I think that Nolan's Batmans are shit. I get them. I understand why people love them. It's because they're dark and gritty. Cool, fine, whatever. Part of the other issue within that, though, and I fully admit it, is that I love Newsies, and so anytime Batman is running through the streets, I just hear Santa Fe. It is sort of difficult for me to disengage those two. And I liked the Joker. I think the best part of those movies are Heath Ledger's Joker and Commissioner Gordon. I think those are the two best parts. But other than that, they are not as good as other Batman movies. And I include Batman and Robin.
As you should.
So do we. Aggressively.
Aggressively. So going back into that is another hill that I die on, is that movie is a perfect Batman movie in that it is the camp Batman. It is the Adam West Batman style. Yes. There are two different Batmans. There is the Frank Miller Batman, and then there is the camp tied to a typewriter Batman. Both can exist. Both should exist.
Yes. Uma Thurman knew the assignment.
Yes, Uma Thurman showed up to work. And honestly, so did Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, he did. Yes.
It is a wonderful movie that brings me so much joy and is so true to the heart of I grew up on the Adam West Batman show as well. Around the same time that I started getting into, so I have very strong memories of those, and I remember reading the old Batman comics once I got into Batman, and the way that I go about it is that I uber fixate, so I dived in and read as much as I could, and it's not all good and it's not all bad. There's a lot of really fun stuff, but nobody has ownership over Batman. Batman is both of these things.
Batman contains multitudes.
Batman does contain multitudes. Honestly, the best, most recent Batman movie is the Batman Lego movie.
Yes! That's my favorite.
It's correct. It is the most correct Batman movie. It has the correct heart. It is the best one at expressing the character of Batman.
100%. That movie understood the assignment.
That movie said, "Oh, that movie got an A+ on the assignment."
That movie is the example that the teacher shows the next class that comes in.
For years to come. Years to come, exactly.
Well, Megan, where can our listeners find you on social media? And do you have any upcoming projects they should be on the lookout for?
I am Meg Fitz 89 on literally every form of social media. We believe in consistency here. And thank you. And I can't say a lot about the stuff that's coming up, but I can say Urban Legends 10. There's a hunk of story in Urban Legends 10.
We cannot wait.
Thank you again for coming on.
Yes, and we love your work so much.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.